So on page 1, you'll see a list of properties, and the top part of this you're probably already familiar with, because I'm assuming everyone has covered associative and commutative and identity and inverse and distributive properties. So you will have, for these properties at the top, up to inverse. Inverse property, you'll up to inverse, that is, you'll have addition and multiplication. So if I ask you to identify a particular like commutative property, you have to say which operation. So you would say commutative property of addition or commutative property of multiplication. So just make sure you just don't say commutative property. You'll have to tell me which one. Distributive property, you don't say either operation. You just say distributive property. Okay, we don't classify that one. But for associative, commutative, identity, inverse, you have to tell me also which operation. Now, I do want to talk about associative for a second, and I would like for you guys to have your spirals next to you while we're doing this, because I'm going to give you some examples for some of these properties in a few minutes. So have your spirals out. Okay, so for associative property, what I usually tell students, because they kind of get this mixed up with commutative sometimes. So what you want to do to test for associative is simply make sure when you're looking at it that the numbers or the letters did not move from one side to the other as far as the order. So see how this says ABC? This also says ABC. So you're not moving anything except for parentheses. Commutative property, pretty basic. C stands for change, O stands for order. So you're changing the order that you're adding. Of course, it does not affect the sum. Change the order that you multiply does not affect the product. Identity property just simply means when you add 0 to a number, you get the identical number. That's for addition. And then for multiplication, you're multiplying by 1, you get the identical number A. Okay. Inverse property of addition, and again, I'm going through these pretty quickly just because these are the ones that you have covered last year, or even probably the year before. Inverse for addition, you are adding a number and its opposite sign, and that will always equal to 0. Inverse for multiplication means you're multiplying by the reciprocal, and it'll always equal to 1. Okay. And distributive property, we have used quite a bit already. Okay, that means you're taking the term on the outside, multiplying it by the terms on the inside. All right, so let's take a look at the two categories here. This category says equality, and the word you see in equality is equal. So these will be the ones that will all have equal signs in them. Inequality simply means they're going to have greater than and less than symbols. And you don't get to the inequality ones until you start talking about transitive, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Okay. This is familiar as well because you already know anything times 0 gives you what? 0. Okay. 0 product, we'll talk about, of course, if you multiply, you can, of course, then if A is 0, you multiply by another term, you also get 0. Now, let's get to the ones that we want to really concentrate on are the ones starting from reflexive all the way down. All right, and this is where I'm going to give you some additional examples to write in your spiral notebooks. Starting with reflexive. This is basically saying A equals to A, which is true. B equals to B, 2 equals to 2. So let's put some examples. So for reflexive, and this is in your spiral notebook. So examples of reflexive basically say a quantity must equal to itself. So we know a number like 2 or any other number cannot equal to another number. It has to equal to itself. That is called the reflexive property. I could also say 3x equals 3x. As long as you have the exact same thing on both sides, it is considered to be the reflexive property. You could have 2x plus 3 equals 2x plus 3. Okay, they're exactly the same on both sides, okay? All right, let's go back. We're going to look at symmetric property. And this is where I always call it flip-flop, because basically it's saying if you have A equals B and you put the B term on the left side first and say B equals to A. Okay, let's see what that looks like. So for symmetric, that would be something like this. So let's say we had an equation that said 3 equals 5x plus 4. Okay, I could actually switch these and say 5x plus 4 equals to 3. So basically I'm just, taking what's on the right, putting it to the left, taking what's on the left, putting it to the right. That is called symmetric. Okay, you want to make sure you have an example of symmetric. And these aren't hard properties like the other ones that you learn are not hard, but you just have to memorize their names. Okay, they're not difficult, but they're new, so you'll just have to practice and know their names. All right, next property is called transitive. All right, so let's do a transitive property. Now, for transitive property, it simply means things are going to change. So we're going to have, because if you look at it, it says A equals B. Okay, hold on one second. So if A equals to B, and it's always an if statement, and B equals to C, then A and C have to be equal to one another. Okay, that's called transitive. So let's say A is 5. Let's just give it a number. And let's say 5 obviously could be 4 plus 1. Okay, so this would be like your, this would be like your A term, this would be like your B term. Okay, so that takes care of that part. Now I'm going to start with B, which is the 4 plus 1, because that's what it says here. And let's say we're going to change 4 plus 1 to 2 plus 3. So that's my C. So it says if A equals to B and B equals to C, then A and C must be equal to one another. So that simply means that 5 must equal to 2 plus 3. Okay. So that's just looking at it in terms of numbers. So if 5 equals to 4 plus 1, and 4 plus 1 can be changed to 2 plus 3, then 5 has to equal to 2 plus 3. All right, that's transitive property. All right, let's move on down to, we're going to do all of these together using an equation: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Okay, and notice you also have ones for inequality, so it would just be the matter of changing an equal sign to an inequality symbol. Okay, so let's test this one out. So I'm going to do all 4 operations. So let's just take a basic equation. Let's say we have 5x plus 10 equals to 20. All right. And of course, I know the first thing I'm going to do is subtract 10. So when I subtract 10 from both sides, this is called the subtraction property of equality. Okay, subtraction property of equality. I'm going to draw my line like I'm adding and subtracting. Okay, bring down my 5x. Okay, now I'm going to divide both sides by 5. So now I have just used the division property of equality. So basically, when you're adding something to both sides, subtracting something from both sides, and multiplying, then you're using those properties. So x equals to 2. Okay. All right, so that's subtraction and division. So let's say we had another one. So I'll call this example 2 for this one. And let's make that 10x. Let's say we had 10x minus 2 equals to 8. So this time I will add 2 to both sides. So what do you think this is going to be called? Addition property of equality. Okay. And again, of course, I would then use the division property since I'm dividing both sides. And then in a few minutes, you're going to learn that when I get my answer, that's called substitution. And I should have written that up here as well. Okay, this is going to be the substitution property. And I'll go over what that is in a second. Okay. All right, last one. The only one I have not used is the multiplication property. You actually did use it, though, for your warm-up today. So if you had something like this, and you have to multiply both sides by 3, so you have used the multiplication property of equality. Okay. When we get the answer, that will be called substitution. Okay. So the last property on that page 1 actually says substitution. So we're going to go back to page 1 at the very bottom and see where it says substitution. Substitution is just when you are like combining the like terms together, or you're multiplying to get an answer, or you're dividing to get an answer. You're substituting what the problem is for its actual answer. So like if I say 1 plus 3 and I change that to 4, I have just used the substitution property. If I say 2x plus 3x is 5x, I have just used the substitution property. Okay, you might want to put that down. And I have a third one. If I say 2 plus 3 is 5, I have just used the substitution property. Okay. All right, so on this page here, which is page 2, okay, you're going to go through and identify what's missing. Some of them, they tell you the property. So if this is, and I'll do the first couple of ones with you. So this says 7 times something equals something, but you have to use the identity property of multiplication. So the identity property of multiplication says if you multiply by 1, you get the identical number. So it has to be 7 times 1 equals 7. Inverse property says when you multiply a number by its reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 1/7 is 7, or 7 over 1. Okay, that equals to 1 whole. Now, remember what I told you, reflexive property. You got to have the same thing on both sides. So I'm going to let you finish. If you come across one like this, where is obviously an operation involved, you have to tell me that property of addition or that property of multiplication. Okay, so I'll give you about 10 minutes to get this filled in. This shouldn't take very long. And then we'll move on to the next part, properties. All right, so what we're going to do on this slide here is apply the properties that are up here as we are solving the equation. So we're going to solve the equation. So this is what we call a proof. So we have to prove how to solve this, but at the same time stating the property that we're using. All right, so in your spiral notebook, we're only going to do one at a time. So I want you to write down 5x plus 3x minus 2 equals 10x minus 15. Given means that's the problem. Okay, so that's what we're given. Okay, so write down that equation, and then we're going to take it step by step and find out what property justifies each step. I can assure you, you will have one of these on your quiz and on the unit test. Right? Okay, so the very first thing we're going to do, we're going to look at it and we're going to say, well, wait a minute, the first thing I have to do, since I have x's on both sides, on the same side together, I'm going to have to combine these together first. Right? So recall, when you're just adding something together on the same side, you're combining it together. We're going to call that what property? Who remembers? What property? No, we didn't add something to both sides. We are just getting an answer. So when somebody said it, substitution. All right, so we're going to pull this down here. So when we actually say combining these like terms together and say that equals to 8x, that is called the substitution property. Okay, so I'll give you a chance to write that down. Okay, that's the substitution property. So the next thing we need to do is get all our variables to one side and all our constants to one side. So first I'm going to let you see what the step says next, so you will know what they did. So how did this become a -2? Raise your hand and let me know. Yes. Very good. Okay, so when you do that, subtracting from both sides of the equal sign, what property is that called? Subtraction property of equality. Okay, because we are subtracting. We did all of the operations. We did subtraction property of equality. If you subtract something from both sides, if you add something to both sides, it's addition and so on. Okay. All right, so that is the subtraction property. That's what gives us the justification here. All right, now we're going to move this constant over. Okay, so that means now we need to add 2 to both sides. So what property is that? Yes. Addition. I mean, it's not even rocket science, guys. This is like, I'm adding, so it's addition property of equality. I'm subtracting, it's the subtraction property of equality. Okay, so it's not hard stuff. So my last step is to divide both sides by the -2. So what property did I just use? The division property of equality. Okay, right there. Okay. And then really when you actually divide at the very bottom, I would call that substitution when you actually get an answer. And I don't think I had it. Here's another substitution. I'm going to put it at the very bottom because the final answer right here is the substitution property, because you're saying -13 divided by -2 is 6.5. Now on a test, I will just tell you to leave it as +13 over 2. Okay. Any questions on that? All right, so we're going to practice this again in your packets. If you will go to the... All right, so on page 4, you'll see some equations, and we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to kind of justify the steps as we're solving them. So let's just start, and I'm not going to do all of them. And of course, the ones I don't do, then you'll finish up, but I will do several of them with you. All right, so let's just start with a really simple one first. Okay, we'll start with number 1. Okay, just so we can still get the feel of what we're doing with the justification. Oh, page 5, my fault. Okay. All right. Actually, I want page 4. I did turn to page 5, thank you guys. But I do want page 4. All right, so on page 4, and this is where some of you made this slight mistake on your test. You saw the distributive property, but for some reason you added 3 plus 5 first. So you can't do that, okay? If you see parentheses, it's all automatically distributed property. You cannot combine any terms until you take care of those parentheses. So let's bring down to 3. Now we're going to distribute and get 40 minus 10n equals to 113. So here I'm going to put given at the top because that's the problem. Here I'm going to write distributed property because that is exactly what I just did. And if you feel like there's just not enough space on the sheet, you can feel free to use your spiral. Some people write larger than others. So if you can't get all the notes in, by all means, you can copy it and then, take your notes in your spiral notebooks. All right, next thing I'm going to do is combine these together because they're on the same side of the equal sign. So that's going to give me 43. Now, when I combine that together, I have just used substitution property. It's just called substitution property. All right, my next step, which I'm sure you guys know, is to subtract 43 from both sides. All right, who can tell me what 113 minus 43 is? 70. So I have just used the subtraction property of equality. Okay, that's that property right there. I've just used the subtraction property of equality. Now I am going to divide both sides by -10. So what property did I just use? Division property of equality. That's correct. So that one actually has a long name. And then when I actually do the division and I get -7, what is that? I'm substituting for the answer. That's right, substitution. Okay. All right, so that's what we call justifying when you're actually solving your equation. We're going to also do this for order of operations where we have to justify the steps. Any questions on the first example? All right, let's move on down. Okay. Let's do one that has a decimal in it. Okay, they follow the same properties. Okay, same process for solving equations. So first thing I want to do is to get all my constants over, or actually, nope, here we go. Look, I have to combine these together. So what is a -5x plus 2.7x? Somebody tell me. What is, yes. All right, negative what? It's negative something. What's -5 plus 2.7? Yes. What did you say? All right, -3.3x. Okay, -3.3x. What property did I just use? I combined some things together and came up with substitution. Very good, substitution. Okay, substitution property. All right, so we changed that to a -2.3 because actually that's 7. Yeah, okay. Now what are we going to do next? Divide. Okay, this is given. Don't forget to write given. All right, so you guys use those calculators to divide so we don't get the wrong answer this time. All right, so 6 equals to x. We just did the division property when we divide it. And then when we got 6, what did we do? Substitution. Very good. All right, so I think you guys got the idea. All right, so I'll do another one. Let's do one where you have to distribute twice. I'm going to do number 10. Okay, so in number 10, there are 2 sets of parentheses, so we have to distribute 2 times. All right. All right, so let's do that. We're going to start off with -30x plus what? plus 72 minus what? 100x plus 60. Very good. So I have just used the distributive property. Okay. Squeeze that in there. All right, next thing I'm going to do is combine some x's together because I see I have x's here. And then I'm going to combine some constants together because I have constants there. So let's do our x's first. How many x's would I have if I combine all of those x's together? Negative what? 130x, okay. And then when I combine my constants, 72 plus 60 will give me what? 132. So when we combined, what property? Substitution. Very good. Substitution property. Okay. Now we're just going to go ahead and finish solving this. So I'm going to subtract 132. What property? Subtraction property of equality, right. And I'm just going to abbreviate because I'm running out of space. All right, draw my line, bring down my negative 130x equals to negative 130. Now I'm going to do what? Division. So what property? What's my property I'm using? All right, division property of equality. All right, and then I get x equals to 1. So when I get my answer, that's called what? Substitution. All right, great job, guys. Very good. Okay. All right, so the good thing is you guys know how to solve equations. So the only thing you're adding to that today is just the justification with the properties. Are we okay with that? Okay. All right, guys, so I'm going to let you finish up this. This is like your classwork for today. So you'll finish up this. And after that, if you have time, you can actually log on to MathSpace and start the assignments that are assigned on that. Okay, and they're due next class. Okay, so just keep that in mind. They will do next class. There will be 2 tasks that you're going to be doing, 2.1 and 2.2. Go to